G'day Jafffa Adventures, Terry King here, welcome to the channel. Well, here's something a little bit different. The Landcruiser's in the hoist bay, not the Monte Carlo. Well, Jill and I went ahead and did it. We bought ourselves a Caravan. And like a good proportion of the population in Australia, we will be towing our effluent around the country. Now don't worry, we're still taking this into some pretty remote and extreme off-roading conditions. But the van will open up new camping opportunities for us, especially now that we've got a granddaughter. So it's time to set up my 200 series cruiser to be able to tow a 21-foot, 3-ton van around the joint. And in its current form, it absolutely cannot do that. You want to see why and what I'm going to do to make it compliant? Stick around. So the first thing on the list is a trailer brake controller. Without it, my Caravan has no brakes, and that's not only illegal, but a certainty for an accident under heavy braking. Now, not only did I get the brake controller, but I got this universal wiring kit. And you know what? If I had my time over, I probably wouldn't get that. I'd just run the wires back to the trailer plug myself. So that's the loom you get in the universal kit. That's the wiring kit you get with your brake controller on its own. That's the Cat 5 cable that goes between the Towpro unit and the dash switch. That's the wiring harness that goes into the Towpro unit itself. That's the Towpro with a bunged up sticker and all. Gee, there's nothing to that unit. Far out. It's as light as a feather. Cable ties. Everybody needs cable ties. Mounting bracket for the brains. Some destructions. Sticker. Throw that in the bin. Some various grommets for your firewall. The little button bezel and the button itself with the little securing screw. That's it. Not much to it. Now I'm down at the ass of the vehicle at the moment, and I pulled off the existing 7-pin flat trailer plug, and that looks pretty manky inside. Let's see if I can clean this up a little bit. The reason I've come to the back here is this vehicle had a brake controller fitted to it before I bought it. Now because I didn't tow, and I needed the spot on the dash, I terminated all of the live connections and just tucked them up inside of the car. So this is a little bit of a voyage of discovery at the moment to find out what I've got and what I need to replace. I mentioned earlier that we bought a van. You may or may not heard about this Zone Caravan debacle here in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast, but it was a major manufacturer of caravans and the administrators were called in. And unfortunately, we were one of the unlucky sods that were caught up in all of that. So we threw down a $10,000, $11,000 deposit on one of these Sojourns, which is kind of their signature van, I guess, 2 weeks before they went into administration. Now, there's a lot of people out there that lost a lot more than us. I tell you, that's 10 grand I'd rather have in my pocket, that's for sure. Chances of getting that back are almost zero. And if we do get anything back, it'll be cents on the dollar. This company has $42 million in debt. And I did a quick back of the fag packet calculation based on the number of vans that they were selling. And I worked out if they had a 20% profit margin, which is generous, it would take them between 5 and 7 years of profit to pay that debt down. So if Zone lives, it's going to be a shadow of its former self, that's for sure. Which is a real pity because you got suppliers, employees, and customers like us who get shafted. And it wasn't because it was a shit quality van either. They are a very good van. So much so that we found a second-hand one on the market, and that's what we've purchased. It's practically new. It's got about 3,000 kilometers on it, and I'm going to pick that up in a few weeks' time. Hence the reason I got to get the cruiser ready to be able to tow. That looks a little better. Now in the perfect world, I'd put the Towpro switch over here on the left-hand side, because if there was an emergency, I don't know, I had a Hardy or something, the passenger could reach over and activate the brakes manually. Unfortunately, my traction control and front and rear diff locks over here on this left-hand side, and that just isn't going to work for me. So that means it's got to go over here on this side, and I don't have a whole lot of choices here either. I've got one of these aftermarket panels, but I've pretty much used up all of the switches. That one there indicates my battery voltage, and that's the on and off switch for that battery voltage. Air compressor, these are USB charging ports, and that's how I turn the USB charging ports on and off. My water pump, my solar panel on and off, my tent on and off, and my tire pressure monitor on and off. Over on this side, you got the switch for the idle up, which I think kicks in less than 5 degrees Celsius. Because here in southeast Queensland, we don't see those temperatures very much, I've just pulled that switch out and stuck it in behind this panel. It's in the permanent on position, so if it does drop below 5 degrees C, it will idle up for me, but it rarely happens unless I'm in the outback in the wintertime. So that leaves me a one switch, this roll sensing curtain airbags. The idea behind that is when you're in extreme off-roading conditions, you turn those airbags off so that they don't mistakenly deploy on you. I've had this car in very extreme conditions. I've never ever turned that on. So I'll pop that button out of there, tuck it behind this panel, and I'll use that blank spot for my Towpro Elite. That there's for my pedal box. Okay, I got that RSCA button out of there. There's my idle up button that was already tucked up out of the road. Now, because this was already fitted with a brake controller, my setup could potentially be significantly easier than if I was doing this thing from scratch. There's the brake controller connector that was in here that I've terminated. It's got our 4 wires going into it, red and blue, which run back to the trailer plug, white, which is an earth, and black, which is a power. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to confirm that the wire here at this plug end does indeed have continuity all the way back to the trailer plug. This is in the connector where the red's been terminated. The red is your brake light activation. So I've just got a little jumper wire here running down, connected up to this red wire. That wire runs all the way back here. One end of my multimeter connected there, the other end connected to the trailer plug. Obviously there's full resistance now because the brake pedal isn't depressed. Got this on squeal mode, so I'm going to go depress the brake. Excellent. That confirms that that red wire does indeed terminate at the plug up front. Now I'm going to do the same for the blue wire. That's hooked up to one end of my ohm meter. Trailer plug at the other end. Let me go connect this blue wire up. Excellent. Continuity. Okay, now I've got my probe in that plug on the white wire, which is the earth. And there's a bit of steel just here in the dash structure. I'll take this end of the probe. Beautiful. 3 out of 4 wires confirmed hooked up correctly. All right, the final wire is the black wire, which is our power. So I got one end of my multimeter on that power. Switch the multimeter over into voltage mode. There, maximum 20 volts. I got the fuse on that black wire plugged in. Let me touch that probe to earth. There we go. 13.85 volts. The reason it's reading minus 13.85 is because I've got the black wire and the red wire swapped around. So that's telling me that plug is all wired up correctly. So this is the harness that comes with my Towpro Elite. There's my 4 wires. I just need to terminate those 4 wires into the plug in the dash. That end of the plug goes into the butt of the Towpro. Man, that has just made things so much easier for me. Now the question is where to mount this little sucker. If you have a look in there looks like there's a perfect spot right here where my finger's pointing. Now RedArc say that you can mount this thing in any sort of orientation that you want, but it needs to be mounted firmly. There's got to be some sort of a sensor in there that can detect acceleration and deceleration, because the harder you hit those brakes, the harder this brake controller comes on to slow your trailer or your van down. So I'm going to put on some of this double-sided tape, stick it up in that location that I showed you, and then I'll zip tie over top of it. There's no doubt this is Mr. China tape, and as the years pass, I'm certain that this stuff would let me down. I'm going to plug these plugs in now because I suspect once this unit's in place back there, some of these would be pretty tricky to get to. There we go. Now I'm going to run a zip tie around this sucker to hold it in place, and I'll check back with you guys once I get that done, because this doesn't look like it's going to be fun. All right, that unit is strapped in there, and that's in there good and solid. She's not going to be coming off. Okay, let me put this rat's nest back together. Back over on the bench, and I've got our little switch, dash switch, and that looks like it's idiot-proof. You can only put it on one way, right? I love idiot-proof things. Then they give you this little threaded bezel holder inner, and then they give you the knob, which sort of just slides over the top. All right, let's go plug that into that dash bezel. Make sure I get it oriented the right way. All right, that's clicked in place, even though I didn't hear a click. This is the loom that plugs into the back of that switch. I'm sure it's idiot-proof as well. Yes, it is. All right, before I jam that back up in there, let me make sure that everything works. Air compressor, I need the key on to run that. Aux battery switch, that's working. USB's working. Tire pressure monitor's working. Tent is not working. Solar panel is working. Water pump's working. Oh, there it goes. Must have just been a poor connection. Okay, time to scoof everything back in here. Once more, we'll test these out. Battery voltage working. USB working. Water pump. Solar. Tent. Tire pressure monitor. And I don't have the key handy at the moment, so I can't test that air compressor, but let's call that done. All right, I'll spray a little bit of Lanatech in here just to try and prevent some corrosion. Believe it or not, these contacts are in good nick. They're not corroded at all. They were just really dirty. Maybe all that red dust protected them or something. I do have some of that electrical carbon conductive grease, but I'm afraid if I was to smear it across there, there might be conductivity between each of the different points. And obviously don't want that. They need to be isolated from one another. All that's left now is to calibrate the brake controller, and apparently you do that by just going for a drive. You'll get a feel for the orientation of itself and for its acceleration and for the deceleration points. Bugger, ran out of tape. Okay, let's try that again. Where I can, I like to put a zip tie at the very end of the taped joints, so just so that it doesn't unspool over time. All right, let me fit that back in there. Not sure whether the camera can pick that color change up, but apparently it flashes between green and blue as it's undergoing its active calibration. Well, I'll take it out for a 5-minute drive or so, hit the brakes periodically, and then we'll see whether this thing's calibrated up or not. Now I've got to test that that brake controller is working, and I got to do it without a trailer or a Caravan with brakes on it, because I don't actually own one yet. And to do that, I'm going to use my handy dandy $5 Chinese test light. Okay, first thing is to find an earth. And that little spot right there on the carrier is as good a spot as any. Next is to pin the trailer brake wire, which is the blue one, which is in the 3rd position here. And that's not going to stay there on its own. Let's see if I can wrap you around here. There we go. That'll work. That blue solid LED, that is a good sign. That means we're in proportional mode. Now, according to this little placard that they give you, I need to be in user controlled mode, which is green. And to do that, set the knob to 0. Done. Apply the vehicle brakes. Done. Press the knob twice quickly and release the brakes. There we are. Green, user controlled mode. Now let me hit the brakes, and as I dial this up, that LED should change color, and there it goes as the brake force increases. So that looks good working at the control knob. The question is, as I dial that up, is that sending more juice to the trailer brakes and locking them on? And that's what I need the test light for. I'm going to hit the brakes in this user control mode, and I'm going to dial that knob up from 0 to 10. There's 0. There's 2, there's 6, there's 10, and then I'll spin her back down. Now that light should have gone from off to bright as I cranked that sucker up. Let me review the video footage and see if it actually did. Now you guys watching the video could have just told me and saved me the effort, but it did work. So I am now confident that the proper signal is getting back there to the trailer brakes. One final test, I'll dial this up to 6 in user control mode, and if I just hit it, it should apply the brakes for the amount of time that I push that button in. Again, at the back of the car, and button is pressed, released. Dial it up to 10, pressed, released. Dial it down to 2, pressed, released. What that was doing was manually hitting those brakes every time I hit that button. That's handy in a lot of situations, but especially in an emergency situation. If you've got the tail wagging the dog and you want to straighten it up quickly, applying those trailer brakes without hitting the brakes in the car will line the whole shebang up and jerk the slack out of the system. The other thing that this Towpro will indicate is when you actually hit the brakes, the LED will light up and correspond to the color or the number on your dial setting. Now it also says on this little placard, my Towpro unit will remember the last mode used every time you start the vehicle. So if I leave it in user mode, when I start it up, it'll still be in user mode. So I need to get that back into proportional mode. Dial that back to 0, hit the brakes, double tap, back into proportional mode. Now I'll remove that test light, and when I do that, that little LED should disappear. So I'm pretty confident that that Towpro Elite is working as it should be. So in terms of broad wiring, you got a power source, you run it through a fuse. This is my fuse block, and one of these provides power to the Towpro Elite unit. You got to mount the Towpro unit in the dash. You got to mount up your little user interface button. You got to run your 2 wires from the Towpro unit all the way back to your trailer plug. That was my get out of jail free moment because those wires were already run for me. And then you got to test it and make sure the whole shebang works. And that's all there is to it. This obviously wasn't a detailed how-to, but it might fill in a little bit of gaps in your research when you're installing your Towpro Elite. All right, let's move on to the next and easiest but most expensive item on my list of what do I need to do to get this thing to be able to tow a 3-ton van. The reason I say it's the easiest is because I didn't actually have to do any work to the car, except peel 13 grand out of my wallet and hand it over to DMW in Toowoomba. Now, before I actually did the GVM upgrade, Archie and I actually took his car and my car over the scales to see how much this thing actually weighed in its current form. I knew it would be over GVM, but by how much? That was the question. So how much did this thing weigh in its current format? That's with the rear seats removed, a very heavy tool and spares box, full water, full fuel, all 270 liters, a complete drawer system, and the fridge. From the factory, these came out with a GVM of 3350 kilos, and mine came in at a hefty 3880. That is 530 kilos over the GVM in its current format. And that'll only get heavier when there's another 200 kilos on the ball hanging off the ass of this truck. The front axle load limit is 1630 from factory. Mine came in at 1720. That's 90 kilos overweight on the front. On the rear axle, the weight limit's 1950. Mine came in at 2160. A full 210 kilos over the limit. As I said, I knew all along I was over GVM. The scales have confirmed it, but now that a van is going to get hooked up to this thing and possibly garner a little bit more attention from the authorities, it was time to do something about it. So what did my GVM upgrade get me, besides 4 rivets and a blue plate on my B-pillar, and a certificate of modification from Queensland Transport? Well, it took my GVM up to 4495, took my front axle up to 1870, and it took my rear axle up to 3000, meaning the total vehicle loaded capacity is now just shy of 8 tons. As I said, my front axle weighed in at 1720. I'm now at 1870. With a van on, I don't anticipate that front axle getting any more weight on it. In fact, it might actually get a bit lighter because of the cantilever effect. My rear axle currently weighs 2160. That's now bumped up to 3 ton. So there's a heap of weight wiggle room in that rear axle now to account for the additional ball weight of a Caravan hooked up to the ass. Now, I'm not going to get into the shit fight argument around GCM. There's only one company that I know of that does a GCM upgrade and placards the vehicle for it. That's Lovell's. I didn't want to have anything to do with that suspension, so I steered clear of that. So let's have a look what they did to this vehicle to bring it up to a GVM of almost 4.5 tons. All important side marker lights changed over. I know it seems ridiculous, and when I asked the guys at DMW what that's all about, it's just part of the Australian design rules or the ADRs for a GVM upgrade. So there you have it. Underneath of the vehicle, that's where all the magic happens. Let's have a look there. Obviously got that diff bracing. That's pretty substantial. New coil springs, new airbags. The diameter of that coil looks a little bit larger than the old ARB BP51s as well. Adjustable panhard rod. The original Toyota one was not adjustable. Good to see that they've gone around and they've marked all of the bolts that they've taken out with a little bit of pen, double checking that everything's been tightened, and it gives you a visual reckoning to see if anything's loosened on its own. There's the Dobson MMR shockies. I remember when we installed Dobsons onto Jacob's 80 series, I always thought that these boots were a little bit How you going? They're just a shitty little rubber boot. That's obviously designed to protect the shank of the shock. It'll be interesting to see after a few gibber roads whether this part that's not protected gets destroyed or not. Guys at DMW had the low speed compression and the high speed compression set at about 50%, about halfway. I backed it off one click, both on the high speed compression and on the low speed compression. Interesting, it says they're 3-way adjustable shocks, but I can't see anywhere where you can adjust the rebound. Need to look at that a little bit further. As part of the kit, DMW installs a diff drop kit. I already had one installed, and just looking at the pucks that are here, doesn't look like they've been changed out, so it looks like they've just left my 50 mil diff drop kit in there, which I'm cool with. Looks like they put in longer jounce stops. I already had longer jounce stops in there, but they've swapped them out with some new ones. Greasable upper control arms, and of course the new front struts as well. And a front end alignment. Okay, all looks good under here from a workmanship point of view. I don't see anything that gives me any heartache or grief. And one final point on GVM upgrades, you need to have tires and rims that allow you to carry the weight that the axle is now upgraded to. I was fortunate, the rims and tires were rated, but if you've got factory rims and tires, for example, you'll be needing to swap them out as well. One thing that kind of did surprise me was there wasn't any requirement for upgraded brakes. In my case, it's not too much of a drama because I upgraded those brakes with DBA slotted rotors and high performance pads some time ago now. Now there is one more job that I've got to do. The Caravan needs a 50 amp fused Andersen plug at the back to take its power from the alternator in the engine bay. So I've got to run this wire from the start battery all the way back to beside that trailer plug. And to do that, I've just got some 8G wire here, along with a 50 amp circuit breaker. All right, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes feeding this cable into this bit of Coro. Figured it'd be easier to do while it's outside the car. So I'll see you guys in about 20 minutes. You might be saying, why did I just not run single core wire back to the Andersen plug and then use the chassis as earth? And it's a great question because I could have done that, but I had this wire from a previous job, so I figured copper wire isn't cheap. Might as well use what I've got to hand. When I have been threading this cable into this sheath, I've kept the earth side of the cable facing the split. Just in case if it ever wore through anywhere, you would think it would wear through on the split before it did on the full side of the Coro. And if it did wear through on the split, it would hit the earth cable before it ever hit the live cable. Even though the thing is fused, it's just another little precautionary step that I can take to prevent any catastrophic failure. All right, I got my 12 volt Andersen wired in. I didn't videotape that because most of the time you're just spent pulling cable. Here it is, comes up through the inner guard. The negative runs directly to the negative battery terminal. Positive over to one side of this waterproof breaker, and on the other side it runs through to the positive terminal of the battery. Let me do a bit of testing to make sure this thing is behaving as it should. All right, no continuity between those 2 points. The breaker is obviously engaged. Let me reset it. Continuity. Sweet. All right, let's test our battery voltage. Battery voltage is 1301. Voltage across that breaker switch is 1301. So no voltage drop there. Let's go out the back of the truck and check it out. All right, let's probe this and see what we've got. 13.01 volts. No voltage drop across 7 meter length of cable. Excellent. And the very last item to allow me to tow is a hitch. Now I've got one of these Shocker air hitches that you see here, and that fits up quite nicely into the factory tow bar. I am still waiting for my DO45 pin. That'll arrive in the next couple of days, and that'll sort this hitch out completely. Well, that's it. As far as I'm concerned, this vehicle is ready to tow. Got the 4495 GVM upgrade, got the trailer brake controller in place and tested. This Toyo had a leak and I had a plug in it. I wasn't game to be towing a van with a plugged tire, so I've gone out and got a brand new. It's still got the rubber titties on it. Got the 12 volt Andersen wired in for the 12 volt supply to the Caravan. Got a Shocker hitch, and that's it. I think we're ready to go. If you disagree with me, let me know why in the comments. There is actually one more job that I need to do on this cruiser. Not critical for picking up the van, but I will get it knocked over before I leave. This factory intercooler, like most factory intercoolers, is leaking. And it's leaking here where the tank is pressed onto the core. I got myself a brand new intercooler from Plasma Man, and that'll be fitted up to the car. But that's the subject matter for a future video. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and the effluent behind you. Bye now.